19 years ago, a 28-year-old bride-to-be in Lakeland, Florida, vanished while driving home from her wedding reception, leaving her family shattered and a town in disbelief. Police suspected a runaway bride theory, since her abandoned car revealed no struggle. But with limited technology and confusing leads, the investigation eventually hit a dead end. Yet over the years, her mother never gave up, keeping the porch light on every night, until a DNA technology breakthrough, a detail overlooked for 15 years, suddenly revealed the true killer, shaking the close-knit community to its core and changing everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe. The Spanish moss hung heavy in the humid April air as twilight settled over Lakeland, Florida. It was Saturday, April 16, 2005, and the evening carried that peculiar weight that comes before a storm, thick, electric, and restless. The streetlights along Kathleen Road flickered on one by one, casting golden pools of light through the gentle drizzle that had begun to fall. In just a few hours, this quiet stretch of central Florida would become the epicenter of a mystery that would haunt the community for nearly 2 decades. At the Lakeland Country Club, the last notes of At Last by Etta James faded as couples swayed on the polished dance floor. Emma Catherine Reynolds, radiant in her flowing white dress, laughed as her fiancé Mark spun her around one final time. The 28-year-old elementary school teacher had waited her whole life for this moment, not just the wedding, but the pure joy of being surrounded by everyone she loved. Her auburn hair, carefully styled that morning, had loosened into soft waves that framed her face as she moved through the reception, hugging relatives and accepting congratulations. She was absolutely glowing, recalled her maid of honor, Sarah Mitchell, years later. Emma kept saying it was the most perfect night of her life. She couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop thanking everyone for being there. She had this way of making every person feel like they were the most important guest at the party. The reception had been everything Emma dreamed of: intimate, elegant, filled with the warm laughter of 150 friends and family members. Her parents, Robert and Linda Reynolds, had spared no expense for their only daughter's celebration. The country club's grand ballroom sparkled with fairy lights and white roses, Emma's favorite flower. The band played a mix of classic love songs and upbeat hits that kept the dance floor packed all evening. As 10 p.m. approached, the celebration began winding down. Elderly relatives gathered their purses and said their goodbyes, while younger cousins lingered on the dance floor, reluctant to let the magic end. Emma moved through the crowd like a graceful hostess, ensuring everyone felt appreciated before they left. She had always been that way: thoughtful, caring, the type of person who remembered birthdays and sent handwritten thank you notes. "Emma, honey, you don't have to walk everyone to their cars," her mother Linda called out, watching her daughter escort Great-Aunt Margaret to the parking lot. "You've been on your feet all day." But Emma just laughed, that musical sound that everyone who knew her would remember.
"I want to, Mom. This is my night to say thank you to everyone who made it special."
At 10:15 p.m., Emma hugged her parents one last time in the country club's circular driveway. The drizzle had intensified slightly, and Mark held an umbrella over her as she slipped into her silver Honda Accord, the same car she'd driven since college, reliable and modest despite her parents' offers to buy her something newer. "Drive carefully, sweetheart," Robert Reynolds said, leaning down to the driver's side window. "The roads might be slick." "I will, Daddy. I'll call when I get to the house," Emma promised, adjusting her rearview mirror. She was planning to spend the night at her parents' home on Mirror Lake Drive, just 4 miles away through quiet residential streets she'd navigated countless times. Tomorrow, she and Mark would fly to the Bahamas for their honeymoon. Her headlights cut through the misty darkness as she pulled out of the country club parking lot, her wedding bouquet, white roses and baby's breath resting carefully on the passenger seat beside her purse. In the rearview mirror, she could see the warm glow of the reception still continuing, a few stragglers reluctant to end the celebration. The drive to her parents' house should have taken 8 minutes. Emma knew every turn, every stop sign, every landmark along the route. She'd driven it thousands of times growing up, coming home from school, from dates, from college visits. It was a simple path through the heart of Lakeland's established neighborhoods, past the old Presbyterian church where she'd been baptized, around the lake, where she'd learned to fish with her father, down the tree-lined street where the porch light would be glowing, waiting for her return. But Emma Reynolds never made it home that night. At 11:30 p.m., Linda Reynolds glanced at the clock above the kitchen sink. A small knot of worry forming in her stomach. Emma should have arrived an hour ago. At midnight, she called her daughter's cell phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Emma's cheerful voice, promising to call back soon. Linda tried 3 more times with the same result. The joy of the wedding night slowly curdled into something cold and terrible, as the Reynolds family realized their daughter had vanished into the humid Florida darkness, leaving behind only questions that would torment them for years to come. Dawn broke gray and ominous over Lakeland on April 17, 2005, the morning sky heavy with the promise of storms. The temperature had dropped during the night, and a thin mist rose from the warm asphalt as Polk County Sheriff's deputies spread out along Highway 98, their radio chatter cutting through the early morning silence. What had begun as a missing person report 12 hours earlier had escalated into a full-scale search when Emma Reynolds failed to return home from her own wedding reception. Detective Ray Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department, had seen enough missing person cases to know that the first 24 hours were critical. But something about this one felt different from the start. Young brides didn't just disappear without a trace, especially not ones with strong family ties and no history of erratic behavior. As he drove slowly along the road Emma should have taken from the country club to her parents' house, Martinez's trained eyes scanned every ditch, every side road, every possible place a car might have gone off course. At 7:45 a.m., Deputy Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the radio, with the words everyone had been hoping and dreading to hear. Vehicle located. Silver Honda Accord, Florida plates match the Bolo. County Road 540, approximately 2 miles east of the Saddle Creek Park entrance. The discovery site was a small rest area that most locals knew as the fishing spot, a gravel pullover where weekend anglers parked to access a quiet stretch of Saddle Creek. Ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss created a natural canopy over the area, and on this misty morning, the scene felt isolated and eerily quiet. Emma's Honda sat perfectly parked between the painted lines, as if she had simply stopped for a moment to enjoy the view. Detective Martinez arrived within minutes, his heart sinking as he approached the vehicle. The car was locked, and through the windows he could see Emma's purse sitting on the driver's seat, her cell phone visible in the center console cup holder. Most striking of all was the wedding bouquet still carefully arranged on the passenger seat, where Emma had placed it the night before. The white roses had begun to wilt slightly in the humidity, their petals edged with brown, but they remained intact, a poignant reminder of the celebration that had ended in tragedy. No signs of forced entry, Chen reported as the crime scene team arrived. No broken glass, no damage to the vehicle. Door locks are engaged. Windows are up. It's like she just stepped out for a minute. Robert and Linda Reynolds arrived at the scene shortly after 9 a.m., their faces etched with a sleepless night of worry that had transformed into raw terror. Linda collapsed against her husband when she saw their daughter's car, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The sight of Emma's belongings untouched inside the vehicle, her purse, her phone, the bouquet from her perfect wedding day, was almost more than she could bear. She wouldn't leave these things behind, Linda whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of deputies setting up a perimeter. Emma never went anywhere without her phone, and that bouquet, she was so careful with it, so proud. She wouldn't just abandon it here. The crime scene photographer methodically documented every detail, the car's position, the contents visible through the windows, the muddy tire tracks and the gravel that might or might not be relevant. In 2005, forensic technology was advancing, but still limited. DNA testing required substantial biological samples, and touch DNA, the microscopic genetic material left by brief contact, was still years away from being a reliable investigative tool. Detective Martinez supervised as the vehicle was processed for fingerprints. though the humid Florida climate and the car's age made it unlikely they would find clear, identifiable prints. The interior yielded dozens of overlapping fingerprints, Emma's, Mark's, her parents' various friends, who had ridden in the car over the years. The prints were smudged, partial and impossibly tangled together, creating a forensic puzzle that 205 technology couldn't solve. "We're dealing with a lot of unknowns here," Martinez told the Reynolds family, as the car was loaded onto a flatbed truck for transport to the sheriff's department garage. "But I want you to know we're going to work this case with everything we have. Emma is going to come home." The search expanded rapidly throughout the morning. Canine units arrived from neighboring counties, their handlers guiding German shepherds and bloodhounds along the creek banks and through the dense Florida underbrush. Mounted patrol officers navigated areas too thick for foot searches, while helicopter units from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement circled overhead, their rotors beating a rhythmic percussion against the overcast sky. By noon, more than 60 law enforcement officers and volunteers were combing a 5-square-mile area around the abandoned Honda. They found nothing: no clothing, no personal items, no signs of struggle, no indication of which direction Emma might have gone, or why she might have left her car in that lonely spot beside Saddle Creek. The discovery of Emma's car had answered one question, but raised a dozen more, and as the day wore on with no trace of the missing bride, Detective Martinez began to fear they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple case of cold feet. The Polk County Sheriff's Department transformed into a command center within hours of discovering Emma's abandoned Honda. Maps of Lakeland covered every available wall surface, marked with colored pins indicating search zones, potential witness locations, and areas of interest. Detective Ray Martinez found himself working his first major case as lead investigator, the weight of a grieving family and an anxious community pressing down on his shoulders like the humid Florida air. By Monday morning, April 18th, the investigation had expanded into a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement assigned 2 additional detectives to the case, while the FBI's Tampa field office provided behavioral analysis support and missing persons expertise. The command post buzzed with activity as officers coordinated search grids, analyzed timeline data, and fielded the first wave of tips from concerned citizens. "We're treating this as both a missing person case and a potential abduction," Martinez announced during the morning briefing. Emma Reynolds had no history of mental health issues, no financial problems, no relationship troubles. "Every person we've interviewed describes a happy woman looking forward to her honeymoon and her future. People don't just vanish from their cars without leaving some kind of trace." The search effort was methodical and exhausting. Teams divided Lakeland into a grid system, with each square mile assigned to specific units. Mounted patrol officers navigated the swampy areas around Saddle Creek, where Emma's car was found, their horses picking carefully through palmetto scrub and around cypress trees that had stood for decades. The thick Florida underbrush could easily conceal a person, and searchers moved slowly, calling Emma's name and watching for any sign of disturbed vegetation. Bloodhounds from the state prison system arrived on Tuesday, their handlers hoping that Emma's scent might still linger despite the rain that had fallen intermittently since Saturday night. The dogs showed interest around the abandoned Honda, but lost the trail quickly, confused by the multitude of scents in the popular fishing area. Martinez watched with growing frustration as the canines circled aimlessly, unable to pick up a clear direction. "Scent evidence degrades rapidly in this humidity," explained handler Jim Torres, wiping sweat from his forehead as his German Shepherd Ranger sniffed around the gravel parking area for the 3rd time. "If she was taken from here in a vehicle, the trail basically ends at the asphalt. These dogs are good, but they're not miracle workers." The helicopter searches proved equally challenging. From above, Lakeland looked like a green maze of residential neighborhoods, commercial strips, and undeveloped wetlands. Thermal imaging equipment could detect body heat through thin canopy cover, but the dense Florida vegetation created blind spots where a person could remain hidden indefinitely. Pilots logged hours over construction sites, abandoned buildings, and remote areas where someone might conceal evidence, but the aerial search yielded nothing concrete. Mark Henderson, Emma's fiancé, became an unwitting focus of the initial investigation. Standard procedure required scrutinizing those closest to missing persons, and Mark's behavior during the crucial hours after Emma's disappearance was analyzed in minute detail. He had stayed at the reception until nearly midnight, helping clean up and saying goodbye to out-of-town relatives who were staying at local hotels. Multiple witnesses confirmed his presence during the time frame when Emma vanished. "I know you have to look at me," Mark told Detective Martinez during his second formal interview. "I've watched enough crime shows to understand that, but I loved Emma more than my own life. We were supposed to fly to Nassau tomorrow morning. Our bags are still packed in my apartment. This doesn't make any sense." The investigation revealed Emma's final known communications with painful clarity. Cell phone records showed her last call at 10:08 p.m., a brief conversation with her college roommate, who was driving back to Orlando. Tower pings placed Emma's phone along her expected route until 10:47 p.m., when it went silent near the Highway 98 overpass, approximately half a mile from where her car was eventually discovered. "That's our window," Martinez explained to the assembled search teams. "Somewhere between 10:47 p.m. when her phone went dead and 7:45 a.m. when Deputy Chen found the Honda, something happened to Emma Reynolds. 37 minutes is all we're working with for the critical time frame." Witness interviews painted a picture of a woman who had everything to live for. Emma's principal at Lakeland Elementary described her as dedicated and beloved by students and parents alike. Her bank accounts showed no unusual activity, no large withdrawals or suspicious transactions. Credit card records revealed typical pre-wedding purchases, flowers, alterations, honeymoon clothes. There was no evidence of secret relationships, hidden debts, or any reason Emma might have wanted to disappear. As the search entered its second week, Martinez authorized the draining of retention ponds within a 3-mile radius of the discovery site. Heavy machinery pumped thousands of gallons of murky water from development ponds and drainage basins, revealing shopping carts, discarded tires, and decades of accumulated debris, but no trace of Emma Reynolds. The massive search effort was slowly winding down, but Martinez wasn't ready to give up. Somewhere in Lakeland's suburban maze, answers were waiting to be discovered. Within 48 hours of Emma's disappearance, Lakeland transformed into a community united by determination and heartbreak. The story of the missing bride had captured local media attention, and by Wednesday, April 20th, news vans lined the street outside the Polk County Sheriff's Department, while reporters delivered hourly updates to increasingly concerned viewers across Central Florida. At Lakeland Elementary School, where Emma had taught third grade for 6 years, Principal Margaret Hoffman organized the faculty response with military precision. Teachers took turns manning phones at the newly established tip line, while others coordinated volunteer search parties and meal deliveries to the Reynolds family. The school's bulletin board became a shrine of photographs, showing Emma with her students, reading stories during circle time, chaperoning field trips to the local science museum, dressed as a witch for the Halloween carnival she organized every year. "Miss Reynolds was the kind of teacher every parent hoped their child would have," said Janet Morrison, whose daughter Katie had been in Emma's class 2 years earlier. "She made learning fun, but more than that, she made every child feel special." When Katie was struggling with reading, Emma stayed after school twice a week for months, never charging us a penny. You don't forget teachers like that. The First Presbyterian Church of Lakeland, where Emma had been a member since childhood, became the unofficial headquarters for civilian search efforts. Pastor David Wells opened the fellowship hall as a coordination center, and by Thursday evening, more than 200 volunteers had signed up for organized search parties. Local businesses donated supplies, water bottles from the Publix on South Florida Avenue, flashlights from the Home Depot, sandwiches from Subway locations throughout the city. "We're going to find Emma and bring her home," announced Rebecca Santos, a family friend who had appointed herself volunteer coordinator. "This community doesn't abandon its own, and Emma Reynolds is family to all of us." The volunteer searches followed strict protocols established by Detective Martinez and the Sheriff's Department. Teams of 6 to 8 people were assigned specific neighborhoods, equipped with maps, cell phones, and detailed instructions about preserving potential evidence. They knocked on doors, distributed flyers with Emma's photograph, and searched vacant lots, construction sites, and wooded areas that professional search teams might have overlooked. Linda Reynolds participated in every civilian search, despite her family's pleas for her to rest. Dressed in comfortable walking shoes and a bright yellow volunteer t-shirt, she moved through Lakeland's neighborhoods with relentless determination, showing Emma's photograph to anyone who would look and asking the same questions over and over. Had they seen her daughter? Had they noticed anything unusual on Saturday night? Did they remember any strange vehicles or suspicious activity? "I can't just sit at home," Linda told a reporter from the Lakeland Ledger. "Every minute Emma is out there, she might be scared, she might be hurt, she might be calling for her mother. I have to keep looking. I have to do something." The tip line established by the sheriff's department was flooded with calls from well-meaning citizens. Some reported sightings of young women, matching Emma's description at gas stations, restaurants, and shopping centers across Central Florida. Each lead required investigation, pulling detectives away from other aspects of the case as they chased down reports that inevitably led nowhere. "We had a sighting at a Denny's in Winter Haven, another at a Walmart in Auburndale. Someone thought they saw her at a bus station in Tampa," Detective Martinez recalled years later. Every single tip had to be treated seriously, even when they contradicted each other. "We had people calling to say they'd seen Emma in 3 different cities at the same time." More troubling were the tips suggesting Emma had voluntarily disappeared. Anonymous callers claimed to have insider knowledge about Emma's state of mind, suggesting she had been having second thoughts about the wedding, or had been involved in a secret relationship. These rumors spread through the community like wildfire, creating painful divisions between those who knew Emma well and those who preferred to believe in scandalous explanations. "The runaway bride theory was easier for some people to accept," explained Sarah Mitchell, Emma's maid of honor, who found herself defending her friend's character repeatedly. "It's more comfortable to think someone made a choice to leave than to accept that something terrible might have happened to them." But anyone who really knew Emma understood that theory was impossible. She would never have put her family through this kind of pain voluntarily. Local media coverage intensified as the story gained regional attention. The image of Emma in her wedding dress became iconic, a beautiful young woman, in white, against the backdrop of her perfect reception, smiling radiantly just hours before her disappearance. Television stations ran the photograph alongside aerial shots of search teams combing through Florida wilderness, creating a stark visual contrast that emphasized the mystery's tragic elements. By the end of the first week, reward money totaling $15,000 had been contributed by local businesses and community members. The Lakeland Chamber of Commerce coordinated the fund, hoping that financial incentives might encourage someone with crucial information to come forward. But despite the massive community response, the extensive searches, and the flood of tips, Emma Reynolds remained missing, and Detective Martinez was beginning to fear they were running out of leads to pursue. 2 weeks into the investigation, Detective Ray Martinez stared at the evidence board in the Sheriff's Department conference room, feeling the weight of a case that seemed to defy every traditional investigative approach. Photographs, maps, witness statements, and timeline charts covered every available surface, but the abundance of information only highlighted how little they actually knew about Emma Reynolds' disappearance. The forensic evidence from Emma's Honda had yielded frustratingly little. In 2005, DNA technology required substantial biological samples, blood, saliva, or hair follicles with roots attached. The trace amounts of genetic material that might be left by brief contact, known as touch DNA, were beyond the capabilities of most crime laboratories. Fingerprint analysis had been equally disappointing. The humid Florida climate and the car's regular use by multiple people had created a palimpsest of overlapping prints that defied clear identification. "We've got partial prints from at least 12 different people," explained crime scene technician Maria Santos, pointing to the enhancement photographs spread across Martinez's desk. "Emma's, obviously, plus marks. Her parents, several friends who rode in the car recently, but they're all smudged, incomplete, or overlapped with other prints. Nothing we can use for comparison purposes." The cell phone records had provided a clear timeline, but raised more questions than answers. Emma's phone had been active until 10:47 p.m., pinging towers along her expected route home. Then, silent. The phone hadn't been turned off. It had simply stopped communicating with the cellular network, suggesting either physical damage or removal of the battery. In 2005, GPS tracking of cell phones was primitive compared to modern standards, and the tower data could only establish Emma's general location within a several-mile radius. Detective Martinez had pursued every conceivable angle. Emma's computer, a desktop model in her apartment, revealed an ordinary life: emails about wedding planning, online banking, educational websites she used for lesson planning. Her browser history showed searches for honeymoon restaurants in Nassau, reviews of snorkeling excursions, and Pinterest boards filled with home decorating ideas for the house she and Mark planned to buy after the wedding. There's no evidence of secret communications, no suspicious emails, no unusual websites, reported Detective Lisa Chen, who had spent days analyzing Emma's digital footprint. Her online activity is exactly what you'd expect from a happy woman planning her future. No dating sites, no financial troubles, no indication she was planning to disappear. The investigation of Mark Henderson had been thorough and uncomfortable. Standard procedure required scrutinizing the victim's closest relationships, and Mark's whereabouts during the critical time window had been verified through multiple sources. Security cameras at the country club showed him helping with cleanup until nearly midnight, long after Emma's phone had gone silent. Hotel keycard records confirmed he had returned to his room at the Hampton Inn, where out-of-town wedding guests were staying. "I understand why you have to suspect me," Mark told Martinez during his third formal interview, "but I was surrounded by people all evening: Emma's aunts from Georgia, my college roommates, the wedding photographer who was packing up equipment. I can give you a minute-by-minute account of where I was and who I was talking to." The polygraph examination, while not admissible in court, had supported Mark's statements. The test administrator, a veteran examiner from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, found no indication of deception when Mark denied involvement in Emma's disappearance. His emotional responses appeared genuine, and his physiological reactions were consistent with someone experiencing grief and anxiety rather than guilt. As the investigation expanded, Martinez encountered the frustrating reality of limited resources in a mid-sized sheriff's department. The Emma Reynolds case was consuming enormous amounts of time and personnel, but other crimes continued to demand attention. Armed robberies, domestic violence calls, drug investigations, and routine police work couldn't be ignored indefinitely, even for a case that had captured the community's heart. "We're doing everything humanly possible," Sheriff Bob Morrison assured the Reynolds family during a meeting in early May, "but I need you to understand that we can't maintain this level of intensive search indefinitely. We're not giving up, we're not closing the case, but we have to adjust our approach as time goes on." The media attention that had initially helped the investigation was beginning to create new challenges. Reporters pressed for updates that didn't exist, while television crime shows featuring similar cases generated a flood of amateur theories and false tips. Someone called to report seeing Emma at a truck stop in Alabama. Another caller claimed she had joined a religious commune in North Florida. A psychic from Orlando insisted Emma's spirit was guiding her to a location near the Alafia River, requiring a 2-day search that yielded nothing but wasted resources. "We're chasing ghosts," Martinez confided to his partner during a late-night shift in early June. "Every lead goes nowhere. Every witness saw something different. Every piece of evidence raises new questions, instead of providing answers. It's like Emma Reynolds just evaporated into thin air." The most painful aspect of the investigation was watching the Reynolds family's hope slowly transform into desperate determination. The massive searches were scaling back. The media attention was diminishing, and the case was beginning its inevitable slide toward the cold case files. But Linda Reynolds refused to accept that reality, clinging to the belief that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to her daughter. By the autumn of 2005, the Emma Reynolds investigation had taken on the quiet desperation that characterizes cold cases everywhere. Detective Martinez still worked to file regularly, but without new leads or evidence. The case had settled into a routine of periodic reviews, follow-up interviews, and the slow accumulation of false hopes. The command center had been dismantled, the maps taken down, the volunteer search parties disbanded. What remained was a grieving family and a community that had learned to live with an unsolved mystery in its midst. Linda Reynolds established her ritual during the first week after Emma's disappearance, and she maintained it with religious devotion for years that followed. Every evening at sunset, she would turn on the porch light at the family's house on Mirror Lake Drive, the same light Emma would have seen glowing in welcome on the night she vanished. The light stayed on until dawn, a beacon of hope visible to neighbors, and a symbol of a mother's refusal to give up. Emma always said the porch light made her feel safe, Linda explained to visitors, her voice carrying the particular weariness that comes with prolonged grief. When she was in high school, she'd call if she was going to be late, and I'd tell her the light would be on. Even in college, when she'd come home for breaks, she'd mention seeing that light as she turned onto our street. I keep thinking that somehow, wherever she is, she might see it and know it's safe to come home. The financial impact of Emma's disappearance was crushing, but rarely discussed. Robert Reynolds, who managed a small insurance agency, had exhausted the family's savings funding private investigators, reward money, and extended searches beyond what law enforcement could provide. The house on Mirror Lake Drive, once paid for, now carried a second mortgage. Robert had aged visibly, his hair turning completely gray within 6 months of Emma's disappearance, his shoulders carrying the weight of a father's helplessness. People don't realize the cost of hope, Robert reflected years later. Every psychic who claims to know something, every private investigator who promises new leads, every potential sighting that requires travel, it all costs money we don't have. But how do you put a price on the possibility of finding your child? How do you say no when someone claims they can bring Emma home? Mark Henderson struggled with a different kind of grief. As Emma's fiancé, he occupied a liminal space, not quite widowed, not quite free, suspended in a relationship that existed only in memory. The couple's planned honeymoon to the Bahamas became a devastating reminder of the future that had been stolen. Their shared apartment, filled with wedding gifts and honeymoon clothes, became unbearable, and Mark eventually moved back in with his parents. I didn't know how to grieve for someone who might still be alive, Mark said during a rare interview years later. Do you hope? Do you move on? Do you wait? There's no guidebook for loving someone who's vanished. Every day I woke up thinking this might be the day Emma comes home, and every night I went to sleep knowing it wasn't. The impact on Emma's students at Lakeland Elementary was profound and lasting. Children who had been in her third-grade class struggled to understand why Miss Reynolds had simply disappeared, and the school brought in counselors to help students process their confusion and fear. Parent-teacher conferences that fall were shadowed by the empty classroom that had been Emma's, still decorated with her motivational posters and reading corner. The kids kept asking when Miss Reynolds was coming back, remembered substitute teacher Carol Williams, who took over Emma's class. How do you explain to 8-year-olds that sometimes people disappear and we don't know why? Some of them were afraid to go home at night, worried that their own families might vanish too. Detective Martinez found himself personally invested in a way that violated every principle of professional detachment he'd learned in 20 years of police work. Emma's case file grew thick with reports, interviews, and investigative dead ends, but Martinez couldn't bring himself to let it gather dust like other cold cases. He would review the file monthly, sometimes weekly, looking for details that might have been overlooked, connections that might have been missed. You're not supposed to take cases home with you, Martinez admitted years later. But Emma Reynolds was different. Maybe it was because she was so young, so full of life, so completely innocent. Maybe it was watching her family's pain day after day. I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in all our evidence, the answer was hiding in plain sight. The community's response evolved from active participation to quiet sympathy. The missing person flyers that had papered every storefront and telephone pole gradually faded and were removed. The reward fund established by local businesses remained available, but rarely mentioned. Lakeland learned to live with the knowledge that evil had touched their quiet city, leaving behind questions that might never be answered. Yet Linda Reynolds never wavered in her vigil. Night after night, year after year, the porch light glowed on Mirror Lake Drive, visible to anyone who cared to drive by and remember that somewhere in the darkness, a daughter was still missing and a mother was still waiting. The years between 2006 and 2018 settled over Lakeland like a slow, persistent fog, carrying with them the peculiar weight that comes when a community must learn to live with an unsolved tragedy. Emma Reynolds had not been forgotten, but her disappearance had transformed from urgent crisis into lingering sorrow, a shared wound that shaped the city's collective memory in subtle but permanent ways. The anniversary of Emma's disappearance became an informal day of remembrance. Each April 16th, the Lakeland Ledger would run a brief update, reporting that the case remained active but acknowledging that no significant developments had occurred. These articles grew shorter with each passing year, relegated to inside pages as more immediate news demanded attention. Yet the community never quite moved on. At Lakeland Elementary School, Emma's former classroom became a memorial of sorts. Principal Hoffman had quietly resisted pressure to redecorate the room completely, maintaining some of Emma's original educational posters and the reading corner she had created with beanbag chairs and bookshelves painted in cheerful primary colors. New teachers who inherited the space often reported feeling Emma's presence, not in any supernatural sense, but in the lingering evidence of a dedicated educator who had cared deeply about her students' success. Every teacher who worked in that room kept one of Emma's motivational posters, explained Janet Torres, who became the third-grade team leader after Emma's disappearance. There was this one poster with a kitten hanging from a tree branch that said, "Hang in there." Emma had written personal messages to struggling students in the margins. We couldn't bring ourselves to throw it away, so it stayed up year after year, reminding us of her dedication. The ripple effects of Emma's disappearance extended far beyond her immediate circle. Parents in Lakeland became more cautious, more protective, more aware of the invisible dangers that could intrude upon seemingly safe suburban lives. Children who had been Emma's students carried her memory into their teenage years, often mentioning her influence when they achieved academic milestones or pursued education careers themselves. Linda Reynolds became a fixture at community events, not in any official capacity, but as a quiet presence reminding everyone that Emma's case remained unsolved. She attended school board meetings, city council sessions, and local festivals, always carrying a small purse containing Emma's photograph and her own business cards, with contact information for anyone who might have information about her daughter. Mrs. Reynolds never made a spectacle of herself, recalled City Councilman David Park. She wasn't the type to demand attention or make dramatic speeches, but everyone knew why she was there, and her presence was a constant reminder that we had failed to protect one of our own. It kept the case alive in our collective consciousness. The economic impact of Emma's disappearance was subtle but measurable. The area around Saddle Creek, where her car had been discovered, experienced a decline in property values as the location became associated with tragedy rather than natural beauty. The fishing spot that had once been popular with weekend anglers became a place that locals avoided, particularly after dark. Real estate agents learned to avoid mentioning the Emma Reynolds case when showing properties in the vicinity, but knowledgeable buyers often brought it up anyway. Local businesses that had contributed to the reward fund continued to display Emma's photograph years after the initial investigation, particularly restaurants and shops along the route she should have taken home from her wedding reception. These faded flyers became a form of community art, visible reminders of a collective promise that had not been fulfilled. Mark Henderson eventually left Lakeland, unable to build a future in a place so thoroughly haunted by the past. He moved to Jacksonville in 2008, where he eventually met someone new and remarried, though friends reported he never quite recovered from the trauma of Emma's disappearance. He would return to Lakeland occasionally, usually on the anniversary, to visit the Reynolds family and participate in whatever small observances they maintained. Mark was a good man who deserved to find happiness, Robert Reynolds said years later. We couldn't expect him to wait forever for answers that might never come. Emma would have wanted him to build a life, to find love again. But it was hard watching him drive away, knowing that he was one more connection to Emma that we were losing. Detective Martinez, promoted to lieutenant in 2010, never allowed Emma's file to be archived completely. The case remained on his desk throughout various department reorganizations, budget cuts, and personnel changes. New detectives were briefed on the case, and Martinez made sure that advances in forensic technology were applied to Emma's evidence whenever possible. The case had become more than a professional obligation for Martinez. It represented the one major failure in an otherwise successful career, the single investigation that had defeated his best efforts and left a family without closure. He would often tell younger detectives that cold cases never truly went cold. They simply waited for the right combination of technology, information, and persistence to bring them back to life. As 2018 drew to a close, the 13th anniversary of Emma's disappearance approaching, none of them could have imagined that the breakthrough they had waited for was finally within reach. The call came on a frigid January morning in 2019, cutting through the routine bustle of the Polk County Sheriff's Department with the urgency that every cold case detective dreams of hearing. Jennifer Walsh from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's DNA laboratory spoke with barely controlled excitement as she delivered news that would resurrect the Emma Reynolds case after 13 years of silence. Lieutenant Martinez, we need to talk about the Reynolds evidence. The new STR analysis protocols we've been developing. We've got results that are going to change everything. The breakthrough had its origins in technology that was still theoretical when Emma disappeared. In 2005, DNA analysis required substantial biological samples, visible blood, saliva, or hair follicles, with tissue still attached. Touch DNA, the microscopic genetic material left by brief skin contact, was known to exist, but remained largely beyond the reach of standard forensic laboratories. The sensitivity required to amplify and analyze such tiny samples simply didn't exist in practical applications. But by 2018, advances in polymerase chain reaction (PCR), amplification, and short tandem repeat (STR) analysis had revolutionized forensic genetics. Laboratories could now extract usable DNA profiles from samples containing as few as 100 picograms of genetic material, roughly equivalent to 10 skin cells. More importantly, new software could interpret complex mixtures of multiple DNA contributors, separating individual profiles from what had previously been considered unusable evidence. The technology we're using now is essentially archaeological, explained Dr. Walsh, as Martinez arrived at the FDLE laboratory in Tampa. We can recover genetic information from evidence that was considered worthless 13 years ago. Items that were tested and filed away as insufficient samples can now yield complete DNA profiles. The Emma Reynolds evidence had been preserved with meticulous care, stored in climate-controlled facilities, and maintained in its original condition despite the passage of time. Martinez had insisted on this level of preservation, understanding that future technological advances might eventually unlock secrets hidden in the physical evidence. That foresight was about to prove crucial. Dr. Walsh led Martinez into the laboratory's secure analysis room, where Emma's wedding bouquet lay carefully disassembled on a sterile examination table. The white roses and baby's breath that had been so carefully arranged for her perfect day now appeared brown and desiccated, but they had been frozen within hours of the car's discovery, preserving any genetic material that might have been present. We focused on the ribbon binding the bouquet, Dr. Walsh explained, pointing to a delicate white satin ribbon that had been wrapped around the flower stems. Your original crime scene photos showed that this ribbon was tied in a specific way, with a bow that doesn't match how it was arranged at the florist. Someone handled this ribbon after the original arrangement was completed. The implications sent a chill through Martinez's experienced investigative mind. Emma's florist had provided detailed documentation of how the bouquet was originally assembled, including photographs of the ribbon arrangement. The bow found in Emma's car had been retied, suggesting that someone other than Emma had handled the bouquet after her disappearance began. The ribbon's surface provided excellent conditions for touch DNA preservation, Dr. Walsh continued. The satin fabric has microscopic fibers that can trap skin cells, and the cool, humid conditions in the car actually helped preserve the genetic material. When we ran the enhanced STR analysis, we recovered a complete male DNA profile that doesn't match anyone in the original investigation. The DNA profile was immediately uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national database that compares unknown profiles against samples from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crimes. The system processes thousands of comparisons daily, searching for matches that might connect cases across jurisdictions and time periods. Martinez waited in the laboratory's conference room as the CODIS search ran, his mind racing through the implications of this breakthrough. After 13 years of dead ends and false hopes, they finally had concrete evidence that someone else had been involved in Emma's disappearance. The DNA profile would either match someone already in the system or become a powerful tool for comparison once they identified a suspect through traditional investigation. Lieutenant Martinez, Dr. Walsh's voice carried a note of triumph as she returned with printed results. "We've got a CODIS hit. The DNA profile from Emma's bouquet matches a sample collected in 2016 during a domestic violence arrest. The individual is a Lakeland resident named Thomas Mitchell Carey, age 52, currently living on Woodland Avenue, approximately 3 miles from where Emma's car was discovered." The name meant nothing to Martinez initially, but as Dr. Walsh provided additional details, pieces of a 13-year-old puzzle began shifting into place. Thomas Carey had been arrested for domestic battery in 2016 when a girlfriend called police following an argument that turned violent. The charges were eventually dropped when the victim declined to testify, but Florida law required DNA collection from anyone arrested for qualifying felonies, regardless of prosecution outcomes. "He's been in our system for 3 years," Dr. Walsh noted. "If this technology had existed when Emma disappeared, or if Mr. Carey had been arrested earlier, we might have solved this case years ago." Martinez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with a major break in a long-dormant case, but he forced himself to remain methodical. DNA evidence was powerful, but it required careful interpretation and thorough investigation to transform scientific results into courtroom convictions. The hunt for Emma Reynolds' killer was about to enter its final phase. The drive from the FDLE laboratory back to Lakeland gave Lieutenant Martinez time to process the magnitude of what he had just learned. After 13 years of frustration, they finally had a name: Thomas Mitchell Carey. As Martinez navigated the familiar highways of Central Florida, he was already mentally assembling the investigative team that would bring Emma Reynolds' case roaring back to life. The first priority was gathering background information on Carey without alerting him to the renewed investigation. Martinez assigned Detective Lisa Chen, now a sergeant with extensive experience in cold case investigations, to conduct a comprehensive review of Carey's history, employment records, and known associates. What they discovered painted the picture of a man who had lived in Lakeland's shadows for decades. Thomas Mitchell Carey, 52, had been born and raised in Polk County, graduating from Lakeland High School in 1985. The same school Emma had attended nearly a decade later. He had worked various blue-collar jobs throughout his adult life: construction, landscaping, home repair, and most recently, a part-time position with a local handyman service that specialized in residential maintenance and repairs. The work gave him access to homes throughout Lakeland, including the affluent neighborhoods where families like the Reynolds lived. Carey's employment history is revealing, Chen reported during the case briefing. He's worked for at least 6 different contractors over the past 20 years, always in positions that required him to enter people's homes: pool maintenance, air conditioning repair, general handyman work, jobs that would make him familiar with residential areas and family routines. The 2016 domestic violence arrest provided crucial insight into Carey's character. Police reports described a pattern of controlling behavior toward his girlfriend, Patricia Santos, including monitoring her activities, restricting her social contacts, and explosive anger when he felt challenged or ignored. Santos had eventually recanted her initial statements, claiming the injuries that brought police to her apartment were accidental, but the responding officers had documented clear evidence of physical abuse. The girlfriend was terrified, noted Officer Rebecca Martinez, no relation to the lieutenant, who had responded to the domestic violence call. She kept changing her story, minimizing what happened, making excuses for him. Classic pattern of abuse. We could see finger-shaped bruises on her arms, but she insisted she'd fallen downstairs. More disturbing were the details emerging from Carey's neighbors on Woodland Avenue. Residents described a man who kept odd hours, maintained his property obsessively, and showed intense interest in the comings and goings of people in the neighborhood. Several female neighbors reported feeling uncomfortable around Carey, though none could articulate specific threatening behavior. "He was always watching," said Maria Lopez, who lived 2 houses down from Carey. "I'd be getting my mail, and I'd look up and see him standing in his yard, just staring. When I'd wave, he'd turn away real quick, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. My husband said I was being paranoid, but women know when someone's looking at them the wrong way." The investigative team's next challenge was establishing Carey's whereabouts and activities around April 16, 2005. Employment records showed he had been working for Precision Home Services, a local contractor that provided maintenance and repair services to residential customers throughout Lakeland. The company's records from 2005 were incomplete, but surviving documentation indicated Carey had been assigned to jobs in the general area where Emma disappeared. Detective Chen's breakthrough came when she located Randy Patterson, Carey's former supervisor at Precision Home Services. Patterson, now retired and living in Sebring, remembered Carey with uncomfortable clarity. "Tommy was a good worker, but there was something off about him," Patterson recalled during a phone interview. "He always volunteered for jobs in the nicer neighborhoods, especially houses where he'd be working while the families were away during the day. I caught him going through a customer's mail once, and said he was just organizing it off the counter." Another time, a lady called to complain that some of her underwear had gone missing after Tommy worked on her bathroom plumbing. The most significant revelation came when Patterson reviewed his old scheduling records and discovered that Carey had been assigned to a job on Mirror Lake Drive in early April 2005, the same street where Emma's parents lived. The work order indicated Carey had spent 3 days replacing a hot water heater at a house just 4 doors down from the Reynolds family home. He would have seen Emma coming and going, Chen realized as the implications became clear. If he was working in the neighborhood for several days, he would have observed her routines, maybe even seen her preparing for the wedding. He would have known about her family's schedule, their address, her vehicle. The circumstantial evidence was building rapidly, but Martinez knew they needed more than proximity and opportunity to build a case that would stand up in court. The DNA evidence was powerful, but they needed to understand how Carey's genetic material had ended up on Emma's wedding bouquet and what had happened during those crucial minutes on April 6. "We're close," Martinez told Sheriff Morrison during an emergency briefing, "but we need to be absolutely certain before we make an arrest. This family has waited 13 years for answers. We can't afford to get this wrong." The arrest of Thomas Mitchell Carey took place at 6:47 a.m. on February 14, 2019. A date that Lieutenant Martinez would later describe as both Valentine's Day and the day justice finally came for Emma Reynolds. The timing was deliberate. Early morning arrests minimized the risk of flight and reduced the likelihood of community disruption. Martinez had coordinated with the district attorney's office to ensure that all legal procedures were flawlessly executed, understanding that after 13 years of waiting, there would be no second chances. Carey's modest house on Woodland Avenue sat quiet in the pre-dawn darkness when 4 unmarked vehicles converged on the property. The arrest team included Martinez, Sergeant Chen, 2 uniformed deputies, and Detective James Brooks from the District Attorney's Investigative Unit. They had obtained both arrest and search warrants based on the DNA evidence and Carey's documented presence in Emma's neighborhood during the time frame of her disappearance. "Thomas Mitchell Carey, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Emma Catherine Reynolds," Martinez announced as Carey answered his front door, still wearing the pajama pants and undershirt he had slept in. The words carried the weight of 13 years of investigation, countless sleepless nights, and a family's unwavering hope for justice. Carey's reaction was telling in its absence of surprise. Rather than the shock and confusion that innocent people typically display when arrested for serious crimes, Carey remained eerily calm, almost resigned. He didn't ask what the charges were about, didn't demand to know why police were at his door, didn't protest his innocence. He simply stood still and allowed the deputies to handcuff him while Martinez read him his Miranda rights. Most innocent people react with immediate confusion and outrage, Martinez observed years later. They want to know what's happening, why they're being arrested, what evidence police think they have. Carey's reaction was more consistent with someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. The search of Carey's house revealed a disturbing collection of items that painted a picture of a man obsessed with control and surveillance. Investigators discovered boxes of photographs taken of women in public places, shopping centers, parks, gas stations, apparently without the subject's knowledge. The photos showed women of various ages, but many bore a striking resemblance to Emma Reynolds, young, attractive, auburn-haired women going about their daily activities. In Carey's basement workshop, investigators found detailed maps of Lakeland, with residential addresses marked in red ink, many corresponding to houses where Carey had performed maintenance work over the years. More disturbing were the personal items that appeared to be trophies: jewelry, clothing articles, photographs, and other personal effects that didn't belong to Carey and couldn't be explained by legitimate means. It was like a shrine to stalking, described Detective Chen, who supervised the evidence collection. This wasn't random criminal behavior. This was systematic, organized, and had been going on for years. Emma Reynolds might not have been his first victim, but she was the one where he finally escalated to murder. The news of Carey's arrest spread through Lakeland with the speed that only social media can provide in the modern era. By 8 a.m., local news stations were broadcasting live reports from outside the Polk County Sheriff's Department, and by noon, the story had gained national attention. The image of Emma in her wedding dress, missing for 13 years, suddenly dominated news cycles as journalists scrambled to understand how DNA technology had finally solved the cold case. The community's reaction was a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and profound shock. Many residents remembered Carey as a quiet, unremarkable man who had worked in their homes, repaired their appliances, and blended seamlessly into Lakeland's suburban landscape. The revelation that he had been hiding such darkness was deeply unsettling to neighbors who had trusted him with access to their most private spaces. "I can't believe it was Tommy Carey," said Janet Wilson, whose air conditioning unit Carey had repaired just 6 months before his arrest. "He seemed so normal, so polite. He was in my house, around my teenage daughter. The thought of what could have happened, it makes me sick to my stomach." The Reynolds family's reaction was captured by news cameras as they emerged from the sheriff's department after being briefed on the arrest. Linda Reynolds, now 64 years old and visibly aged by 13 years of grief, spoke to reporters with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion that was heartbreaking to witness. "We never gave up hope that someday we'd know the truth about what happened to Emma," Linda said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "This doesn't bring our daughter back, but it means that the person who took her from us will finally face justice. Emma can rest in peace now, and maybe we can too." Robert Reynolds stood beside his wife, one arm around her shoulders, his free hand wiping away tears he couldn't control. 13 years is a long time to wait for answers, he said, but Emma was worth the wait. She deserved justice, and now she's going to get it. The investigation was far from over, but for the first time in 13 years, the Reynolds family could see the end of their long journey toward the truth. The trial of Thomas Mitchell Carey began on October 7, 2022, in the Polk County Courthouse, an imposing brick building that had witnessed decades of Central Florida's legal drama. Outside, autumn thunderstorms rolled across the flat landscape, their rumble providing an atmospheric backdrop to proceedings that would finally bring closure to one of Lakeland's most haunting unsolved cases. Prosecutor Sandra Williams, a veteran attorney with the state attorney's office, had spent 3 years building an airtight case against Carey. The DNA evidence was compelling, but Williams knew that modern juries expected comprehensive proof that connected every piece of the puzzle. She had assembled a presentation that would walk jurors through 13 years of investigation, technological advancement, and the methodical police work that had finally identified Emma's killer. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams began her opening statement, "in April 2005, DNA technology couldn't tell us what we're going to show you today. But science advances, truth endures, and justice, though sometimes delayed, will not be denied. The evidence will show that Thomas Mitchell Carey kidnapped and murdered Emma Catherine Reynolds on the night she should have begun the happiest chapter of her life. The prosecution's case was built on multiple pillars of evidence that, taken together, painted an undeniable picture of Carey's guilt. The DNA evidence from Emma's wedding bouquet was the cornerstone, but Williams supplemented it with testimony about Carey's presence in Emma's neighborhood, his pattern of stalking behavior, and the disturbing collection of trophies found in his home. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the FDLE laboratory provided crucial testimony about the DNA analysis, explaining in accessible terms how touch DNA could survive for years and how modern technology could extract usable profiles from microscopic samples. Her presentation included enlarged photographs of the wedding bouquet, highlighting the specific areas where Carey's genetic material had been recovered. The defendant's DNA was not just present on the victim's bouquet, Dr. Walsh explained to the jury. It was present in a pattern consistent with deliberate handling. Someone who had untied and retied the ribbon binding the flowers. This wasn't a casual transfer from a handshake or brief contact. This was direct manipulation of evidence at the crime scene. Randy Patterson, Carey's former supervisor, provided testimony that established Carey's opportunity and knowledge of Emma's routines. His records showed that Carey had worked on Mirror Lake Drive during the week before Emma's wedding, giving him intimate knowledge of the neighborhood and the Reynolds family's activities. Tommy was always asking questions about the families where he worked, Patterson testified. He wanted to know their schedules, when they'd be home, when they'd be traveling. At the time I thought he was just being thorough about scheduling his work. Now I realize he was gathering intelligence for something much more sinister. The defense, led by veteran attorney Michael Rodriguez, faced a nearly impossible task. The DNA evidence was scientifically sound, the circumstantial evidence was compelling, and Carey's own behavior during the investigation had been suspicious. Rodriguez's strategy focused on challenging the timeline and suggesting that the DNA evidence, while proving contact with the bouquet, didn't necessarily prove murder. My client's DNA being present on the victim's flowers is troubling and unexplained, Rodriguez conceded during his opening statement. But presence at a crime scene is not the same as committing a crime. The prosecution wants you to believe that Thomas Carey kidnapped and murdered Emma Reynolds, but they cannot tell you where this alleged crime took place. They cannot tell you how it happened, and most importantly, they cannot tell you where Emma Reynolds' body is. The absence of Emma's remains was indeed a challenge for the prosecution, but Williams had anticipated this argument. She presented expert testimony about body disposal methods and the extensive searches that had been conducted in. Michael Harrison, a forensic anthropologist, explained how bodies could be concealed in Florida's vast wilderness areas, swamplands, and construction sites that were subsequently developed. Central Florida in 2005 was experiencing rapid development, Dr. Harrison testified. Construction projects, new housing developments, and infrastructure improvements were occurring throughout the region. A body concealed during this period could easily have been built over, paved over, or otherwise made permanently inaccessible to discovery. The most emotionally powerful testimony came from the Reynolds family themselves. Linda Reynolds, now 67, took the stand wearing a simple black dress and carrying the small purse that had contained Emma's photograph for 17 years. Her testimony about the night of Emma's disappearance, the years of searching, and the family's unwavering hope, was delivered with quiet dignity that left many jurors in tears. We never stopped believing that someday we'd learn the truth. Linda testified. Every night for 13 years I turned on our porch light so Emma would know it was safe to come home. Even after we learned what really happened to her, I kept turning on that light, because it had become my way of honoring her memory, and showing her that her mother never gave up. The jury deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts of kidnapping and first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Linda Reynolds collapsed into her husband's arms, 17 years of grief and determination finally finding release in tears of relief and justice. Thomas Mitchell Carey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Patricia Martinez, no relation to Lieutenant Martinez, noted during sentencing that while the court couldn't restore Emma to her family, It could ensure that her killer would never again threaten another innocent person. On the evening after Carey's conviction, Linda Reynolds walked to her front porch one final time and turned off the light that had burned every night since April. The darkness that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful, carrying with it the knowledge that Emma's killer would face justice, and that her memory would live on in the hearts of everyone who had never stopped fighting for the truth. The Emma Reynolds case stands as a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of technological advancement, and the unbreakable bonds of family love. For 17 years, a mother's faith and a detective's dedication kept hope alive when conventional investigation had reached its limits. The porch light that burned every night on Mirror Lake Drive became more than a symbol. It became a beacon of determination that ultimately guided justice home. The breakthrough that solved Emma's case represents a revolution in forensic science. Touch DNA technology, unimaginable in 2005, transformed microscopic evidence into powerful proof. This advancement offers hope for thousands of other cold cases across the nation, where similar evidence waits to reveal its secrets. Emma's case proves that no case is truly cold as long as evidence is preserved and technology continues to evolve. Perhaps most importantly, the case revealed how evil can hide behind the mask of ordinary life. Thomas Carey was a trusted member of the Lakeland community, welcomed into homes throughout the city, his darkness invisible to those who encountered him professionally. His conviction serves as a sobering reminder that the greatest threats often come from those who appear most harmless. The healing process for Lakeland and the Reynolds family continues. Emma's legacy lives on through the Emma Catherine Reynolds Foundation, established to support families of missing persons and to fund forensic technology advancement. The foundation's motto, inscribed on a memorial bench in downtown Lakeland, captures the spirit that sustained hope through the darkest years. Love never gives up. As dawn breaks over Central Florida each morning, the sunrise illuminates a community forever changed by tragedy, but strengthened by its commitment to justice. Emma Reynolds has finally come home, not in the way her family hoped, but in the way that matters most, through truth, justice, and the enduring power of love that refused to surrender to darkness.